Hey everyone, welcome to Myth Talk. Today's Myth Talk is on a legendary creature itself, and the vampire. The vampire has been a part of folklore that subsists on feeding on the life essence, generally in the form of blood of the living, in European folklore. Vampires were undead beings that often visited loved ones and caused mischief or deaths in the neighborhoods they inhabited when they were alive. They wore shrouds and were often described as bloated and of ruddy or dark conscendence, marked differently from today's grot pale vampires, which dates from the early 19th century. And over the years, there has been many, very different discriminations and descriptions of the vampire through movies, TV shows, and even news itself. Vampires are fonder for books, movies, and Halloween costumes, but hundreds of years they were scapegoats for disease. The traits of a modern-day werewolf or vampire is pretty well established. They have fangs, drink human blood, and can see themselves in mirrors. They can be warned off with garlic or killed with stake through the heart. Some, like Dracula, are aristocrats who lives in castles. But vampires didn't start out so clearly defined. Scholars suspect that the modern concept of these Halloween monsters evolved from various traditional beliefs that were held throughout Europe. These beliefs centered around the fear that the dead once buried could still harm the living. Once these legends arose from misunderstanding of how bodies decompose. As a corpse skin shrinks, its teeth and fingernails can appear to have grown longer, and internal organs break down. A dark purge fluid can leak out of the nose and mouth. People unfamiliar with this process could interpret this fluid to be blood and suspect that the corpse had been drinking it from the living. Bloody corpses weren't the only cause for suspicion. Before people understood how certain diseases spread, they sometimes imagined vampires were behind the unseen forces slowly ravaging their communities. The one constant in the evolution of vampire legends is that they are closely associated with disease, writes Mark Collins Jenkins in his book Vampire Forensics. Trying to kill vampires or prevent them from feeding was a way of people to feel as though they had some control over the disease. Vampires of Europe. Because of this, vampire scares tend to conclude with outbreaks of plague. In 2016, archaeologists unearthed a 16th century skull in Venice, Italy, that had been buried among plague victims with a brick in its mouth. The brick was most likely a burial tactic to prevent strega, Italian vampires or witches, from leaving the grave to eat people. Not all vampires were thought to physically leave their grave. In northern Germany, the Nazirer, or the after-devorators, stayed in the grave, chewing on the burial shrouds again. This belief likely has to do with plague fluid, which could cause the shroud to sag or tear, creating the illusion that the corpse has been chewing it. These stationary massacres were still thought to cause trouble above ground and were also believed to most active during outbreaks of the plague. In the 1979 tract on the chewing dead, a Protestant theologian accused the Nazirer of harming their surviving family members through occult processes. He wrote that people could stop them by exhuming their body and stuffing its mouth with soil and maybe a stone and a coin and of good measure. Without the ability to chew, the tract claimed the corpse would die of starvation. Tales of vampires continued to flourish in southern and eastern Europe nations in the 17th and 18th centuries, to the chagrin of some leaders. By the mid-18th century, Pope Benedict declared that vampires were hallucinous fictions of human fantasy, and the Habsburg ruler Maria Theresa condemned vampire beliefs as superstition and fraud. Still, anti-vampire efforts continued, and perhaps most surprisingly of all, one of the big lasting vampire scares occurred in 19th century New England, 2 countries after the infamous Salem witch trials. Vampirism, or vampire lifestyle, is actually something that actually exists, which pretty much means that you act as if you are a vampire and you involve drinking blood and even going around dressed up as vampires of olden age, or even just feeding on each other. Most commonly, it is largely stemmed to be part of the Goth subculture. However, that is not all the cases. And some people have fetishes in the vampire community, using blood as a fetish or stimulant in sadomasochistic sex. Quite interesting. Now you can play as role plays of vampires. However, when you get into drinking blood and that's where I draw the line. Some even believe that vampires slept in coffins. With that said, I think we're going to end this out on that stuff. So next week's Myth Talk will be on manticore. Have a great day. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. And make sure you guys subscribe to my YouTube channel. It means a lot. Peace.